Hi, I'm Zen and welcome to this video on the Introduction to Media Queries, the backbone of responsive web design. This is a requested video and a quick starter into media queries where we're going to change this desktop layout, and as a basic one here we'll see it doesn't do anything when we try to shrink it, into this one here where we can see it changes into the phone layout. So let's roll the intro and learn how to do it. If you've watched any of my previous videos, then you know about the standard housekeeping that I do. And as always, feel free to jump to the timestamp you see on the screen or use the chapters in the description to miss this if you've already heard it a million times before. However, if you're new to web design and you don't have your own setup, consider watching my Getting Started series of videos, which the link should be showing up on your screen about now. This will show you how to get the same software and the same setup as me, making following along my videos a lot easier. For reference, I'm using Visual Studio Code and the Chrome browser. And also if you are new, well, nice to meet you. Hi, like I said, I'm Zen. And if you look in the description, you'll also see a link to the site files that I'm using for this video. So again, you can follow along perfectly. Since this is the first one in what I hope to be a series of videos, no prior stuff is needed, just the files in there. Of course, you don't need the files, you can just watch the video and pick up as you go along. That's absolutely fine. And talking about the files that we're using, let's start looking at the HTML. So this is the HTML page that we're using. As you can see, we have the standard link to the style sheet that we'll have a look in a moment. And then we have the wrapper with a header, the navigation bar with a few links, and then a div here called row, which has two children, the section of main, which has a lot of text in it. We also have a div child here as well with an idea sidebar, and then we can see that div is closed, and that's the closing of that row. And then we have the footer at the end. None of this HTML that we've looked at so far will be touched at all in this video. Okay, it's just there for reference. Everything we're going to be doing will be done in the CSS. So I suppose we should go over and have a look at that. So here we are in the CSS file, and we can see we've got the root, wrapper, head, main, and link are all standard CSS. Nothing really to talk about. It's only when we get to row, which if you remember is the parent tag for the sidebar and the main, that it has what you probably may not have seen that often, a display of table row. And if you actually look at the main here and in the sidebar, you'll see that they are actually set to display as table cell. And the reason for that is just to marry the two heights together. Okay, now if we were of course doing this in a grid or flexbox, this wouldn't be an issue. But when we're using a more, should we say, traditional style of layouts, it can become a problem. And we can fix that using the table row rule. And finally, in here, we have the footer CSS. Again, fairly standard. The one thing you might have noticed with all this code is the fact that the majority of the width, in fact, I think all of the width, except for the wrapper and probably the links, are all done using percentages, and this just gives it a little bit of natural responsiveness. However, like I say, the queen or king of responsiveness is in that CSS rule. So let's have a look at our first one. So here is that definition, and this is a fairly standard media query definition that you'll come across. It starts off with the @media, which is a bit like the keyword to define in CSS that we are doing a media query. More often than not, after it we have the media type, because believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, the media queries aren't just for your monitor screen. No sorry, they can be for your laptop, for your mobile phone, they can even be for your printer, and believe it or not, even screen readers for when they're coming out in speech. So it's very important right at the start to be able to tell it in the media query exactly what the media type it is that we are using. Followed by that, we actually have what perhaps is the bit that most people think about, the breakpoint. Now, Before we get to the breakpoint data, please notice this very, very important and. And what's more important about the and is the space before it and the space after it. A lot of people try and write their media queries without the space after the word and will be surprised to find it does not work. That space is required definitely in Chrome, Opera and Firefox at the time of me testing it. After that, we actually see the criteria, which looks like a CSS property because we're using max width at 480 pixels. Notice that the actual condition is inside brackets, normal brackets, parentheses, and we're using a colon to separate the property to the value, just like we would do in a normal CSS rule. Now you can actually use more and some other logical operators to chain a rather complex criteria, but this is the normal one you'll see. And you'll either be with max widths or with min widths, depending if you are starting from big going to small or starting small going to big. The reason why we've chosen 480 here is that that is a very common value that we use for mobile phones. In fact, I believe it is the resolution they use to check for the original iPhone. After that, we actually have the standard curly braces, which we use again in a normal CSS rule. And then what we do is that we put the CSS rules that we want to be added into this section here. It's also worth noting that this max width section is what you often hear as the breakpoint, because it is where we break from one set of CSS rules to another. So when you hear the term breakpoint, this is what they're talking about, the actual value that is going to cause the CSS change. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a width, it could be a height, it could even be an orientation if you're talking about mobile phones and tablets. And so what this says altogether is that if the person is viewing this page using a screen and the width is less than 480, in other words, the maximum width it can be is 480, we want you to display the page using the rules inside here. Obviously, if there's a rule outside from the normal ones, and that hasn't been contradicted or overruled inside here, the original rules will still apply. So in order to do these rules, you've got to decide what we're trying to do. Now this is 480, so the mobile phone, like we said before, which generally means we want a one column system. And that includes having our length going down in vertical rather than horizontal. So that's one of the first things we're going to need to do, is to write the CSS code so that the links stack underneath each other. And these are the rules that we need. As you can see, these are normal CSS rules, and all we do is put them inside the media query for them to be active at these breakpoints. So what we need to do now is to see if this works, and the easiest way to do that is to use the developers console. So we press F12 on the browser, and then we make sure that we've got this device toolbar open, and then because we've now got the value, we can just shorten this down until we hit the 480, and there you go. As you can see, as we're going around 483, there you go, just jumps in. So we can see that that breakpoint is working perfectly for the links. And so the next thing that we need to do is to sort out the main and sidebar. Obviously, we can see here that the sidebar is far too thin, and these need to be stacked on top of each other, just like it does in the navigation. Now, the problem with this is that we actually still have that row rule, which is linking these two together so they actually have the same height. So we're going to need to change that rule as well as the main and sidebar. So let's add that code. And this is the code that we need. You can see here we've changed the row to display block, and the main and sidebar is basically the same rule, so we might as well just use one set for both. Now, as you can see, let's just scroll this back up to the top. We're already at 449. Once we save this, we should see the change happen straight away. And there we do. And so as we now move it past, there you go. As we go past the 480, we can see it works great. Okay, so if you remember, the reason why we use the 480 width was because it's a very common value used for mobile phones. And like I said, I think it's actually used for the iPhone. Another value that people use a lot is the 800 pixel width, because that is a value that is often used for tablets in the portrait mode. So we're going to use that as our next breakpoint. So you can see this rule is almost identical to the previous one, except for the fact that obviously we've gone from 480 to 800. And so now we want to ask ourselves, what do we want to do for this? And the answer is going to be the navigation. Now we don't want it to jump into the vertical stack like we do at 480, but at 800 we can see this is getting a little bit too close. So what we can do is to change the left hand margin for these links, so then further to the left hand side to give us some more space. So let's go and do that. And here is that nice and simple rule. All we're doing is reducing the margin to 20, whereas before, looking at the original one, it was 150. So that'll make a huge difference to how it's presented. So again, if we just save this, there you go, we can see the change there. And that allows it to go all the way down. In fact, it's even good at the 480 point. We could probably hold that back really until, I don't know, probably to about that point. So around about 300 mark actually, like that would be fine. However, also at this 800 point, we still think, or I still think, that this is a little bit too skinny and this is starting to get quite long, so it might be nice having this at 100% width again. So really we want the same rules as what we had before. So let's add those in as well. Here are our rules, and again, as I said, it is identical to what we have up here, and it actually means that we can take it out. Oops. We can actually take it out of the 480, because max width of 800 will also work for something with max width of 480, because 480 is less than 800, so this rule will still apply to it. So here we are with the rules change, and we're just outside of the responsive. So if we just move it in that little bit, look at that, it works perfectly, and we move it down. I think that. Now there is something I want to point out here, which is, even though these values actually work out perfect for this particular design, using breakpoints 480, 800 and the other ones that you're here, such as 1024, 1200 for the landscape versions of tablets, as well as things like the Surface tablet, etc. So doing it in this method where we are doing our breakpoints based on certain phones or certain tablet sizes is really a big mistake. Okay, the media queries work really nicely, but it's still a bad idea. Why is it? Well, it's because we are being device centric. Okay, we're looking at specific device resolutions, and that is not a good way of doing it. Okay, there's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, there are thousands upon thousands of different devices that go on the internet, you know, from people with 8K screens on their desktops all the way through to tiny mobile phones with widths of maybe even less than 300 pixels on some of the really lower end products. And it'll be basically impossible for you to be able to do a resolution for each and every device. You'll just go nuts. And also the reason why it's not a good idea is because you're forgetting about your actual website. What you need to do, and this is what you should do when you're doing media queries, is to actually look at your website and see how it reacts at different resolutions. And then when you think it is starting to look, should we say, ugly or not very functional, that is the point of when you need to add in your breakpoint. And it doesn't matter if it's a weird number like 853, it makes no difference whatsoever. You do it so your website looks good at all resolutions. So you're doing it irrespective of what device they are using. Now, the only time that that is not the case is if you know that you're building a product for an extremely narrow market. Okay, so let's be honest, if you're doing an Apple product, okay, a website for adult, so for example, if you're doing a website for that does Apple products and only Apple products, you could probably, you know, design them for the iPads, the iPad Pros, the Macs, and the iPhones. because they have some very set resolutions, and of course you'll make it better for that. And as we know that most people who buy Mac products already have Mac products, and therefore they are going to, have those resolutions. It could be, for example, that you're building a mobile system for your company. So you're trying to make it so it works properly within your company, and you already know what the resolutions of the desktops that you're using. And maybe your company has a purchase system where they buy the same tablets or mobile phones or laptops. And so you have a very set number of resolutions that you're looking at, in which case obviously design to those. But for 99% of the time, do it so your website looks good at any resolution, not at any device. If you make it right at any resolution, it'll be right for any device. And with that all being said, my job here is done. There's going to be a whole lot of videos on this topic, probably another 5 off the top of my head, and they'll be coming soonish as times allow. I've got a couple of series going on, so I'm going to try and sort of alternate between them, which means if you are an early watcher to this video, then you got a chance to be able to guide what my next video will do in media queries. So if there's something you want me to cover, you want me to go into more depth in the different types of media that we do, or a little bit more on the resolution ideas and edge cases, whatever it is, please let me know. Put it in the comments for me. And if there is a proper demand for something, I will add that into one of the videos or do a specific video on it, just like I've done for this one here. So thank you for staying with me all the way. If there's a video you do want me to do, like I said, or if you want to ask me anything, please whack it in the comments section, as I do read everyone. And as always, if you found this video useful, please like and consider subscribing. Every single sub and every single like really helps my channel out. So see you guys next time. I'm Zen, signing off.